So you want me to tell you the story of my life?
Like I said, that's what I do. I interview people. I'm a collector of lives.
Welcome to Table Talk. I'm Heath, and I'll be your host. This is the show where I go one-on-one with a creator, author, illustrator, publisher, or other mover and shaker in the world of tabletop games, video games, TV, movies, or any other area of the geekverse.
You followed me here, didn't you?
Yeah, I suppose I did. You seem very interesting. This is where you live?
Yes, this is my home. Welcome.
So, what do you do?
I'm a vampire.
That's something I haven't heard before.
Guests have included individuals such as Lou Anders, the author of the Thrones and Bones fantasy novels, creator and publisher of the Norengard RPG, and even the author of Star Wars, A Pirate's Price.
Bond. James Bond.
Well, not James Bond. I haven't gotten to talk to him yet, but maybe sometime in the future. But how about Brian Colin, the creator of the vast, grim, dark horror RPG and sculptor of the world of Revelo monster busts? Mark Tassin, the creator of the world of Italtus, head of Mechanical Muse, and the head developer of the new Cool Name RPG. I've spoken with Jeff Engelstein, game designer and former commentator on the Dice Tower. He and I got deep into the statistics, probability, and psychological function of dice in tabletop games. Jamie Stegmaier, the founder of Stonemaier Games and crowdfunder extraordinaire. He's published many hit board games like Scythe and Wingspan. I've spoken with Sydney Engelstein from Indie Boards and Cards to talk about what it really takes to publish a board game in today's environment and what it would take for you to get published if you were trying to get a publisher for your board game. I've spoken with Ajit George about game writing, education, and his contribution to Van Richter's Guide to Ravenloft and his development of the Journey Through the Radiant Citadel Dungeons & Dragons book. Let's see, who else have I spoken to?
I am Hela, Odin's firstborn, commander of the legions of Asgard, the rightful heir to the throne, and the goddess of death.
Yes, I really appreciate her taking the time to speak with me. That was a great interview. I've also spoken with Cameron Pasha, writer and novelist who's been working in Hollywood for over 20 years. His projects have included Emmy and Golden Globe nominated Sleeper Cell, Kings, Nikita, and Roswell, New Mexico. His analysis and commentary have been very popular on YouTube. I've gotten to speak with Paul Shadow, the former network executive who has made quite a splash here on YouTube with his reaction videos to current movies and films. He and I discussed the status of independent film and web productions online today. Brianna da Silva is a reoccurring guest on the show and a very popular one at that. She's an author and director, and she was also the co-writer of the cultist comedy web show that's here on the channel. She and I regularly meet to study and analyze stories. I've also gotten to speak with of the Positive Fandom channel. She's an ally in our effort to be a positive and constructive force in the geekverse. Are you ready? Have you got your drink? Are you all settled in? You might want to buckle up because it could be a wild ride. We're about to explore the worlds of tabletop gaming, sci-fi, fantasy, and the geekverse through the eyes of those who are making things happen.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger. Ready to move out.
It's time for Table Talk. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Table Talk. We are here in the office once again. And yes, I know this is supposed to be the one-on-one show, but hey, we're very flexible here. And sometimes we get an opportunity to bring people together who have not yet met to have an even better conversation about the kinds of topics that we are talking about here. And so tonight we have two very special guests. We have Doug Burton, who we've had, of course, on the show before, talking about the Heroine's Labyrinth. He's the author of a book on that subject, his alternative to the hero's, the feminine alternative to the hero's journey. And then also Brianna da Silva, who is an author and director, not only of the cultist, but of her own novels as well. So here we are. Please welcome them. Here's Doug and Brianna.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. Hi. So welcome, both of you. It is fantastic to get to talk to you both. I know that, so Doug and I have been over the Heroine's Labyrinth structure together, and Brianna was watching, and now Brianna has tons of notes to come in here and critique it. So it's going to be a good conversation.
Critique and also just get more clarifications and stuff because I'm super intrigued, basically.
Sure.
But yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was tough going over just like bits of it.
Right. It's
there was a
unfair
lot.
because you've written a whole book and so there's a lot that I'm sure will be answered by your book.
Well, and you've
So
written
I
a
look
book,
forward to-
right?
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
you remember the first time someone's like, "Can you sum it up in like 2 sentences?" And you're like, "I just wrote 400 words, and you want me to sum this up?" So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I've never written not a nonfiction book though, so that's even like a whole nother ball game.
it's not as
So
fun.
I
It's not as fun.
oh man, I
But
bet.
actually, speaking of fantasy or fiction novels, though, I do want to be sure that we are clear that both Brianna and Doug have fiction novels out. We want to be sure we cover that. So,
Nice.
Doug, do you want to say what yours is? And I can pull it up over here as well. So you want to tell us what? So
yeah, I
the
wrote a
Heroine's
historical
Labyrinth isn't
fiction.
out yet, but this is.
What? Say that again.
I said the Heroine's Labyrinth isn't out yet. That's still looking for a publisher or what's going to happen. But your
Right.
fiction book is.
Yeah, the Heroine's Labyrinth is in its final phases. But the book that I wrote originally that really got me into the Heroine's Labyrinth was Faraway Bird, as you could see there on the screen. It's a historical fiction novel. It's about a real life woman, an empress of the East Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire. And she's such an interesting figure because she's been really stigmatized, in my opinion, through history. And this really obscures a lot of her accomplishments. So I wanted to write a book that didn't try to hide the controversial elements, but kind of went right into it. And in fact, made a case that the controversial elements was her arc at where she, learned
Oh, cool.
found her source, like her sense of what's right and wrong, and took that with her right to the throne of the empire. Because she ends up influencing a lot of legislation, which by today's standards would be women's rights. And when most people have never heard of her, or there's a large segment of people who haven't heard of her. So anyway, that was my attempt. I'm very proud of the book. Theodora was interesting, and it was Theodora who entered the arena with Joseph Campbell and defeated him, and led me to want to write the Heroine's Labyrinth. So
Awesome.
All right. So that is available on Amazon now. And likewise, Brianna has The City of Reckoning right here.
Yes.
And so that is also on Amazon. So we'll be sure we talk about that.
that's a cool cover.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love the cover designers. They're out located in the UK, and they're really cool. But yeah, so The City of Reckoning is a big, massive hunk of a epic fantasy novel, and it's about a group of young people who get caught up in a war and begin to wonder if they're fighting for the wrong side. So it deals with revolution and also young love and journeys into the wilderness and all sorts of fun stuff.
All the good stuff.
All the good stuff, yeah.
Very
All right.
cool.
So I want to be sure we covered that. So both of them have books out that are available now. All right. Brianna, do you want to start?
Sure, sure.
All right.
Yeah, so there are two things that I kind of want to talk about before talking about it, if that makes sense. One of them is that the pre-talks, right? One of them I kind of mentioned it to Doug before we started, and that's just kind of like that. I'm kind of being like peer review right now. Like I have a lot of things where I'm just like, that's just kind of how I am. I'm like, well, this is really interesting. What about this? What about this? And so that's part of what I'll be doing. And then also I just kind of want to frame a little bit of my interest in this topic and what brought me to it, because I think that will help contextualize some of my questions.
Sure.
So for me, I'm someone who's very I'm someone who usually likes the hero's journey, or broadly speaking, I suppose. Actually, let me rephrase that. Let me back up a little bit. What I'm as a storyteller, I'm really interested in what a lot of people would kind of categorize as sort of the traditionally masculine aspects. I'm really interested in in war and in combat and basically women with swords. That's my big thing. And so while I'm very satisfied with that kind of an archetype or that kind of a story, for the kinds of stories I write, something that I've noticed in the culture at large is that it seems to be a lot of denigration of femininity, especially with women. I think there's a denigration of masculinity in men, but the one with women, of course, pisses me off in particular. As a woman, and like a couple examples would be like the Eminem stupid controversy where they like made their very feminine characters more like androgynous, as if that was some sort of improvement.
Yeah, it's odd. I know what you mean.
Right. Or Galadriel was one that pissed me off, where it's like, this is a very feminine character, and then they had to make her a warrior as if that was better. And I'm a pretty androgynous woman. Like, for a woman, I'm a lot less feminine than most women I know. But I don't think I'm better than them. I'm just different. And so that pisses me off. And so I'm in this stage of like, well, I want to defend femininity, and I want to defend a feminine hero and the kind of stories you would tell about them. But I'm sitting here going, I don't know what that is exactly. It's a little bit harder to define, and I want to know what it is I'm defending.
Sure.
And so I suspect there's probably multiple answers to that question. But so that's kind of where I'm coming from, is this, like, I want to promote those kinds of stories more, even if I'm not the one that usually writes them. But yeah, so that's kind of.
Hey, I'm a guy, and I wrote Theodora. So.
Right.
I feel you. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I also sometimes wonder what we're trying to solve by attacking femininity as if it's like old fashioned or something, as if it's or as if it's cliche, that almost treating certain things like it's cliche. I'm like, well, it doesn't mean it's cliche. It doesn't mean it's wrong. So I'm with you 100% on that. And I do think it's tough to try to. It's always tough to try to define something definitively, especially something broad, and something that might mean something to different people. But I certainly appreciate the effort there, because I think it's a worthwhile cause to especially in stories, because I wanted to say too, I'm not anti-hero's journey. Even though I wrote The Heroine's Labyrinth, I am extremely pro hero's journey. I have not turned on it. I've not turned against it. It has real life implications, even in my personal life. So to me, the fact, at least in my head, the fact that I have The Heroine's Labyrinth and The Hero's Journey, both, I don't have to elevate one to bring the other down, or vice versa. I have two models to pull from. And the more I understand both models, the more I see a little bit of both in a lot of stories, which is interesting. So we're probably on a similar page in terms of honoring archetypal images, stories, and themes, masculine and feminine archetypes. I don't think that those are completely manufactured. I think some of those come from the human imagination, and that's not a disqualifier to me.
Yeah. Quick question, since you just kind of mentioned something that I was going to get into later, but I want to ask this now. Do you think it's possible for a story, like just in your, because you've spent a lot more time thinking about the hero's journey than I have too. I feel like I'm still learning it. All I've done is I've read this book. I've just finished reading it very recently, so it's very fresh in my mind. But I have not yet read like some of the stuff that's written after, like what Heath's reading, or I don't know if you finished it yet, but the writer's journey, which applies it to writers.
Christopher Vogler.
So I haven't, so I haven't read his take on it yet. That's coming up. But do you feel that a story could be both? Like, is it possible, do you think, for a story to be both a hero's journey and to have the Heroine's Labyrinth kind of archetypes? And do you feel that weakens it at all, or do you think that's just that they're compatible? Interesting.
Nope. I think that there's several stories that have both. I have examples that I've worked on even for my book. And then there are examples where because the hero's journey has existed for a while, I feel like there are stories where the writers tried to write a hero's journey and somehow ended up writing a Heroine's Labyrinth anyway. In fact, Labyrinth is one of those that I think they were trying to write a hero's journey, but still they ended up in this other model. Alien and Aliens, believe it or not, has both elements of hero's journey and Heroine's Labyrinth. There's two villains, in fact, and one meets the Heroine's Labyrinth definition of a villain. The other meets the hero's journey definition of a villain. Wreck-It Ralph. Ralph goes on a hero's journey, but Vanellope goes on a Heroine's Labyrinth journey simultaneously in the story. I think the original trilogy of Star Wars was a hero's journey story, but the prequels was a Heroine's Labyrinth story with Anakin cast as the heroine, actually. So I don't think it weakens it at all. I think it's up to the storyteller to understand what archetypes you're unearthing as you tell your story. And if you identify that, understand the meaning of it, and then load up on that, because people will respond to it. That's my thought anyway on that.
Yeah.
But you could definitely have both. There's not one at the expense of the other.
That's really interesting. Do Do you think, what do you think might be behind that? I mean, this is kind of a deeper question, so it's fine if you don't have an answer for it, but like if something ends up falling into both, do you think that has to do with the hero in terms of their nature and the fact that they might fall under both kind of archetypes? Do you think it's kind of random, just the story asks for that? Or what do you think might be behind that, if you know?
Well, I think my definition of so the word archetype, I guess by the root words, means archos, which means primal or first, and typos, which means like model. So the word means primal models. And I believe these are like in our heads from nature or divinity, like whichever way you want to go with that. They're like programmed in there. That's why. So my definition, that's the root words, but my definition is an archetype is something a human being can recognize even in a dream. We don't need to be told. Like we can recognize.
I've had dreams like that.
Yes. So
I had a dream recently with a mentor character. That was my subconscious was definitely trying to teach me something. Anyway, continue.
So exactly. So these things just bubble up from this, from the source of our imagination. And Joseph Campbell has a great quote. I should almost pull it up, but it's in that book, actually. He says, archetypes based, and I'm butchering this, but he says they can't be manufactured. You can't invent them on your own. They're spontaneous creations of the mind, and they all contain he says, like the germ seed of like human understanding of life on Earth. So when you have a dream of a mentor figure, that comes up automatically, and your brain, your mind, your imagination fills it in, and you understood something that nobody else told you. And when you go to when that understanding, I think every writer's had this moment where something in a dream comes up. You're like, I am going to use that in a story. And then you try to
that too.
Well, even like Jim Morrison taking all those drugs and he wrote like The End. That's loaded with archetypes. I think he literally just took a lot of drugs, went deep diving into his subconscious and just pulled stuff up and made songs out of them. And we hear these songs, and no matter how bizarre the song is, we're still resonating. It still resonates with us because it's archetypal. He pulled something up that I can understand, So I think, so when you say what's behind it, I think it's a writer's job as this particular type of creative person is to pull those up and to articulate those. And that's hard. A painter gets to do it more instinctively, and that's not to demean painting by any stretch. It's a different type of creative science or art. Writing, you have to articulate it. You have to be specific enough to write it down in a sentence. And that can be challenging to translate onto the page what that is. But I think our imagination of what an adventure is, if your character's moving out further away from home, you're probably going to stumble on hero's journey type of archetypes. If your hero or heroine is going deeper into this native culture, you're probably going to start running into those Heroine's Labyrinth archetypes. And in some cases, you can have a little bit of both, or characters that are exhibiting a little bit of both, or one or the other. That's my thought anyway.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Go ahead. Sorry, Heath.
Well, let me interject here for a moment, because you brought up Anakin Skywalker, which Brianna and I have talked about before. But you brought up Anakin Skywalker as an example of the so then, what is your relationship then between the heroine's journey and the story of the fall and/or corruption? We're just talking about.
Well, would you say it has to do with that, or is it just in terms of like the events that happen?
I think you guys might be onto something with the corruption arc. I haven't spent time analyzing that specifically, but I'm extremely intrigued by it. Like if I saw a book on that, I'd buy it. So
he and I are kind of working on that.
Writing.
Kind of.
Yeah, I think that's extremely intriguing, and I think that it grapples with one of the core elements of all storytelling, which is the ethics of action. Are you doing something that's right or wrong? How much wrong can you do before you've crossed a line? Anakin may have done some bad things, but when he pulls out a lightsaber on younglings, it's like, now there's no coming back. And to come back, it's only, you're not forgiven. You'd still have to go to jail or stand trial or capital punishment. Like, it's good that you redeemed yourself, but that doesn't forgive everything you've done. You luckily died when he redeemed, because it's not like he joined the rebellion and they give him high fives, So
Right.
I think it's two separate things. I do think there might be a distinctive standalone corruption arc, which is what it sounds like you guys are exploring. And I would love to hear your when you've come to more conclusions on that. I'd love to hear it.
Got a more developed theory.
Well, sure, but I think there's something there.
Yeah.
Just you mentioning it made me start to like. I literally had to stop thinking about it because I have this that I have to finish. But there's something there. I mean, there's something there, and you might come up with another monomythic model. I mean, you Heath, you said you were working on the Fall of Lucifer.
Right. Yeah. That's the next up after the Tales of Rabavania. Right.
Yeah. It's the funniest coincidence. It just so happens to be that Heath and I are both working on these big, epic dark fantasy stories for adults that are corruption arcs, and they're completely different from each other, but they have that in common. So that's why we both have this like obsession where we're like, well, I want to figure out how to do this. What's
the framework that's the same, even though the stories are totally different?
I have the first draft of my first script that does that. But
there
here it is.
Wow, nice.
Yeah, it needs to be edited quite a lot, but that's the first draft.
Hey, that's first draft territory right there.
In process. yeah. But yeah, so that's interesting. So that kind of fits in with what I would think that it could be both. And that is a very intriguing thought, because there was a lot of things where when I was listening to your conversation with Heath, you were giving a lot of examples of stories, and I was like, but that's the hero's journey. Like, to me, that's completely the hero's journey. And so if it can be both, then that's interesting. But I do want to talk about a couple of them briefly, just to get your thoughts, maybe to go a little bit more in depth. Let me see, where did I write this down?
And I do have Doug sent me some notes. If Doug, tell me when you want to bring up, if it comes to a point to bring up those notes, let me know and I can bring it up, because I do have that.
I give you those only if they applied. Like if we were going to try to walk through like for instance the Labyrinth or Pan's Labyrinth. That's a good. What I did was I took my summary at the end of every chapter, like the Masked Minotaur. These, as far as I could tell, are the most common threads that help define or serve as a criteria for this archetype. So it's a nice reference.
Okay, just let me know and I'll bring up the reference. If it comes, if it's time, let me know, because I do have it ready. All right.
Okay, that sounds good.
So the big one for me is Katniss Everdeen, because she's like the most, probably the best modern example. It may be best example period of a female character doing like a hero's journey in both the Campbellian and the Vogler sense, because I feel like there is a little bit of a difference in how they talk about the hero's journey. Possibly, we'll see when I read the book if I still feel that way. Sure. But because like one thing in particular that kind of threw me off a little bit, and maybe this is easy to answer since after what you just said, but because you're talking about sort of the difference between the native culture and the and like an other culture, right? Because I don't see that the hero's journey requires that per se. Like I think about like if the call to adventure could be something pretty simple. It could be, there's something in your garden there's a fairy in your garden. I know that brings you somewhere. And so to me, that kind of threw me off, because I was like, well, I don't know that it would be any less of a hero's journey, say, if you're Alice going down, maybe you're just dreaming the whole thing, or if you're Katniss, because for Katniss, I feel like she is kind of leaving her culture, because she's going from District 12 to the capital, which is right. She has Panem, and she has a complete like culture shock situation going on there too, because it's completely different. But so I'd love to hear you like kind of go into that more, and like,
well, there's maybe it's easy, So like you guys, I think you both have done this. We are kindred in that, like you, I have sat down and tried and watched movies and just plugged them into the hero's journey. I'm not kidding. I'd have either a laptop on my lap or a pen and paper, and I'd just sit there and watch. And then I'm like, okay, that's the call to adventure. Nice. And then I'd plug it all into an Excel spreadsheet, and then I'd go through the Excel spreadsheets, and then I'd write it all out. Like, it was insanity, but we're writers, so that's normal for us. But so I would spend a lot of time trying to plug movies into the hero's journey, and there's obviously nothing wrong with that. That's the only model we've really had to judge it by. So, and you know how it goes. Sometimes it's a stretch to be like, well, that's kind of the wise mentor, So sometimes it's a stretch, and a lot of times, or let's say some of the times it's not a perfect fit. So what I've always tried to do is try to figure out, does this fit structurally, even if it's not a perfect match to what Joseph Campbell defines. And, you know, most of the movies I did look at through the hero's journey. And this is just me. I'm the only person on earth right now because I have this other model. I'm looking at it structurally from a different standpoint. So it's not that the hero's journey would not apply or should be disqualified or eliminated from the conversation. That's not what I'm saying. There's certainly a case to be made that there are hero's journey tropes in Hunger Games, for example. Mm-hmm. But for me, once I've defined the heroine's labyrinth, when I was watching Hunger Games or reading Hunger Games, I started to see it from a different perspective, and I began to shift more toward the heroine's labyrinth. That doesn't disqualify my other thoughts on it or your thoughts on it by any stretch. But for instance, like the sacred fire, Hunger Games has one of the coolest sacred fire moments of all. Like she catches fire in front of everybody, in front of it, and she's the girl on fire. Like it becomes like a massive theme throughout the whole story. So she's got one of the greatest symbolic sacred fire moments out there. And the hero's journey doesn't really have much to say on that necessarily. And I do think that it's not that it's absent from the hero's journey, but it's certainly more featured and prominent in the heroine's labyrinth. Second, the villain is a member of her native culture. He's a social apex character in President Snow. But there are aspects of the hero's journey too, in that there's a lot of combat and she's set in this exotic location. And you know, it's a survival situation. But there's also a poisoned apple. She gets stung by tracker jackers, and she's disoriented in a way which is very typical for heroines in a heroine's labyrinth story. So I began to see all these other themes that lined up with the heroine's labyrinth, but I'm the only guy that's got all this. So I have this whole different viewpoint of it, that I'm like an island right now, but
right. For now,
so it's harder to share all of that, but or to have a bunch of people talk that have matched this up. But I definitely see a lot of the tropes from the heroine's labyrinth with Katniss Everdeen. One of my observations was that a lot of heroine stories have revolutionary, not all of them, but like there's a revolutionary aspect.
Interesting thing, yeah.
I mean, there's almost none better than Katniss Everdeen. She's like the ultimate revolutionary figure.
Yeah.
You'll even see in artwork, a lot of revolutionary artwork feature a woman. In fact, John Wick 4. Remember that discussion in the museum? Heath? They're having that.
Oh, yes. It's underneath. Yes. What was
the name of that huge painting of the Revolution of France. It's a woman. She's topless with the flag of France, and she's like front and center in the Statue of Liberty, holding the sacred fire of freedom for the United States.
Well, I mean, you said revolutionary women. I immediately thought Molly Pitcher.
Molly, yeah. Well, the more you look at it, the more you'll find there's Joan of Arc, Boudica. I mean, there's so many figures historically, but there is something archetypal, it seems to me, that's associating the feminine hero with a revolution. And I think it's because
I've observed this too. I agree with you quite a lot on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's because of this rub with the native culture. Heroines tend to be good models for challenging the native culture. And so that's why I think there's a relationship. And cut me off whenever you want. But
no. I want to hear you. I'm here to talk to you. So
Liberty Leading the People. That's the name of that painting that they were having that discussion in John.
That's what's funny is that's the picture I have in my manuscript under revolutionary. I have a genre section, like in an appendix. And I was trying to talk about the genres where the heroine's labyrinth structure works so well with certain genres. And revolutionary tales is one of the genres, and that's the picture I use, is that picture from John Wick.
That's interesting.
From revolutionary France, but it's in John Wick.
Yeah, I wanted to mention one other thing about Katniss before moving on to another thing.
Great.
Because one of the things that I absolutely loved that you were talking about was the concept around the refusal of the call. Now, one thing that I'm not sure that I am convinced that the refusal of the call is like a necessary step in the hero's journey, only because I don't see that originally with Campbell. I know Vogler says that. But I do love your idea on why someone would refuse or not refuse. It has something to do with how dangerous their journey is going to be and how much it is a risk to their life. That if it is dangerous, then they're going to be more likely to be like, well, I don't know about that. So that seems to me like that seems to be like a very useful thing for writers. The only problem is that Katniss technically should have also refused by that framework, because she was also going to probably die. So that's like an interesting kind of like, it just kind of made sense in the context of her story that she would be willing because she's doing it for her sister. So I feel like there's like another principle there where it just kind of depends on the names of the story. But I think your principle there is probably like a good go-to start with, like, should they refuse or not?
It's a good criteria to judge, because I'll explain myself too. I actually was judging heroines based on the hero's journey and getting like frustrated. I thought writers were skipping all these steps, and I thought they were doing it to make the heroines look better. That's what I thought. I was wrong.
Right.
But I started writing this entire article called "The Incomplete Heroine," and I was just, they never refused the call, and that, you know, and I was going,
but no. I mean, why does it have to be a step? That's what I'm like. Well, I mean, whatever. That's a whole other conversation. But.
Well, so true, and that's actually a separate discussion, I would say.
Right.
From a writing standpoint, do we have to follow these rules? The answer from a writing point is always no.
Right.
Whatever works is what you should do. But when you enter into these archetypes, if you're there, if that's in your story, you should recognize it and build it out. Be a key element. But you're right. Katniss doesn't refuse the call. I actually quote her in the book. I might have to take it out. I heard you can't use quotes in books. But she's like, I volunteer as tribute. There's no, I mean, she is absolutely clear about it.
Right.
The only thing I could say is she's behaving more like a shield maiden, which is a heroine trope where she is literally she's not physically leaping in front of her sister, I don't think, but she's clearly doing it to save her sister. So there's an an instinctive, immediate reaction to defend another person. And that's the spirit she seems to be responding to. So you're right. It doesn't fit into my two criteria, but she clearly refused. She jumps at the call, which I find to be typical of heroines, but it seems to be for a different reason.
Right, it is. It's kind of a different one, like because I definitely see the pattern you're describing, where it's like a lot of heroines are going to. It's like they don't want to be at home, right? Like that's something that's oppressive, and so they'd rather leave and go on this adventure. But in her case, she doesn't want to go on the adventure; she just wants to protect her sister. So I guess that kind of goes to the principle of like it depends on the story sometimes. Sure. Yeah, I guess that's just.
Well, she's acting heroically. I mean, it's not like they said, "Hey, who wants to volunteer?" And she's like, "I will volunteer." You know,
no.
They were going to take her sister, and she was emphatic. You cannot do this. I'm going to take me in her place. And she did it without even thinking. And then you're right. Then she ends up in the survival situation. But technically, you're right. The likelihood of her destruction was very high to enter the Hunger Games. So, but yeah, there was no real. It's not like she's like, I'll volunteer. Wait. You could take my sister. She didn't do that. She didn't. There's an additional.
I was just gonna say there's a parody of that where the opposite happens. I think. So it's the Starving Games anyway.
Oh, where she's like, take my sister instead.
Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not very heroic.
But there is an additional wrinkle to this that is worth talking about, because this is something that Vogler talks about, and it's something that Cameron and I had talked about as well. That we're talking about he's talking about in that book, the refusal of the call, and that, okay, what do you do with willing heroes? So he does actually discuss in his book the case of the willing hero and what happens in those cases. So he covers that in the writer's journey. Okay. And Brianna and I had talked about that as well, because when I was writing the story of my mythic Rabivanian hero, who is their mythical god and things like that we talked about, we actually had a discussion about, does he need to when the monster is threatening their warren, should he refuse the call? And I worked with that, and just did not work, because he's this mythical hero, and that when danger comes, he doesn't refuse, he goes and accepts. So actually Cameron said, no, wait a minute, he's not refusing the call. He needs to refuse the call here. but there is a more sophisticated. It seems like, well, I don't know if you want to call it more sophisticated. I guess I would call it
another
more
option.
The most simple and direct way to go is for the hero to say, no way, I can't do that right now, and step back from it, and then be turned around and accept the call. So that's the most direct way to go about that. But there's a more sophisticated story that Vogler outlines when you have a willing hero, but that he says that the refusal of the call is embodied in another character. And he gives some different examples
that's
where
transference.
Yeah. So he says that you actually, and if we're using the terminology that Maxwell Alexander Drake was using when he's talking about the physical level and the spiritual level, or the immaterial level of the story, it seemed like that Vogler was trying to say something like that, that even if on the physical level, danger comes and the hero is like, yeah, I'll do it. Like, I'm here. I'm the mythical hero. I'm Hercules or whatever. I'll defend my people. Has on the immaterial or the spiritual level, I guess we could say, the audience received that that part of the refusal of the call through another character. And he gave several different instances of willing heroes in the movie where the danger was still expressed, but through a different character.
Thor is a good example. He's so over the top arrogant that it's almost like his dad pulls him out of the game and puts him on a bench by sending him to Earth. He's like, you shouldn't be so willing, you shouldn't be so arrogant. So that would be an example, at least in my head, of another character kind of stepping in and being like, a little modesty, a little self, reflection might suit you better. You could even have a mythical character. Did you ever see The Watchmen, the movie from 2009? Those characters refused to call out of like apathy to humanity. Like, well, what do you want from us? The world will ask us to save them, and we'll say no. That's a refusal, technically, of the call. They end up doing it anyway, but it's a different type of refusal. It's not vacillation. It's apathy.
It's apathy.
And in the case where,
it does seem like there could be other reasons why someone refuses. Yeah, it's interesting.
I was going to say that one of Vogler's examples is in Dances with Wolves. He says the Dances with Wolves. Kevin Costner's character is a willing hero. He does everything he's supposed to do, but that remember the wagon driver that goes out with him?
Yeah, Timmons.
Yeah. I don't remember his name, but the wagon driver that goes out with him embodies the refusal of the call, because that guy panics. Like, you're going to stay out here. You can't stay out here. We got to go. We're leaving home right now. They're in, the Indians are out here. They're going to kill, or what, all the danger.
There's danger. Yeah.
He embodied, like, I'm turning around right now. We got to get out of here. He embodied the refusal of the call, but then Kevin Costner's character pulled a gun on him and said, nope, get my stuff out of this wagon. I'm staying here. So in that example, so I would be interested. I've watched the Hunger Games. I have not read them. So I would be interested in looking at that as well. So we have situations where we are saying we have this heroine who is refusing the call. Have we perhaps embodied that refusal in another character?
Well,
here's still emotionally,
because in the Hunger Games, it seems like it's like embodied maybe in everyone. It just, I don't know. There's something about that feels like it's sometimes a stretch, but that's kind of the case always with these structures. Sometimes it's like that sort of fits.
Yeah, they're a little elastic. The hero's journey is like the perfect version of it, which no story really follows a perfect version of it. It's slight variations all across the board, and the same is true with the heroine's Labyrinth. That's why you want to try to find the most basic core elements of the archetypal event, and then and then does that all apply? If it doesn't all apply, then don't force it. But also with the Hunger Games, she had to make an immediate decision. She didn't have time to really vacillate or think it through, or be like, hey, maybe I'll do it for my sister. Come back tomorrow. Like she had to make the call like right there. My thing with the reason I think the refusal of the call is at least important to seriously consider is because from the reader standpoint, us, the regular person, we're going to read this, we're going to remember that. And we might have a situation in our life that's very serious. An opportunity comes to us and we back off. The archetype reminds us that's normal to want to back off, but you have to re-engage. You have to reverse that. You have to take that opportunity when it comes. So to me, it's an important reminder that even heroes second guess themselves, because that will speak to someone in real life later. That's why I think it's important to seriously consider putting it in there, because if the willing hero is so willing and then I balk in real life, it's like, oh, I guess I'm not heroic. I guess I'm just not that guy. But if Luke Skywalker and Neo are balking and then become great heroes, I might be like, well, they did that too and ended up to, go on to great things. So I think it's there not on purpose. I think it's there on accident, because that's what most people do in terms of a great undertaking coming to you at now, like this moment. What do you do? So I think it's inherent. I think it's an instinctive thing writers have put in there on accident enough to notice it as a theme. And now we're like, should we put it in there or not? I think it should be seriously considered based on, I guess, a wider range of criteria, I guess we could say.
Cool.
I'm not sure if it's accident. Now, we don't need to get into that here, but I wonder when I'm studying the same things, is that accidental, or is it because it's also deliberately humanizing them for the reason it's the reverse of what you just said. It's a humanization of them. It's more than you were. Oh, hey, Luke Skywalker did this too. It's Luke Skywalker's doing this. That would be me. It's the humanization as well. So I wonder if it's accident or is that more deeply psychological. That's what we do. So that's what needs to be.
That's what humans do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is what I think they're doing so wrong with heroines today. They have to be vulnerable, because that's how I can understand them. When Ripley goes to
they have
fight
to be
the
human.
alien,
Yeah.
Yes. Show me that she's scared. I'm not going to look down on her for that. I'm not going to judge her because she's terrified out of her mind. But if she,
I couldn't
show me
possibly
what it's
agree
like
more.
to be scared and go out anyway. Because that's something that I'll start to lean in. When Ripley goes to fight that alien, there wasn't a man in the theater who's like, "Oh, she ran away. What a wuss." We're all like, "Yeah, get the hell out of there." And then she comes back. We're like, "Oh, what is she thinking? What is she doing?" And then she wins. So show me that she's vulnerable. Show me that she has doubts. I think if I was like a young girl, I'm gonna have doubts. I'm gonna seriously question whether I'm up to something or not. Show that in our heroines, because if our heroines act like that and overcome it, then all those girls watching will be like, okay, so having doubts is normal. I have doubts. That's a normal thing. So you have to show your heroes and heroines. You have to show their vulnerabilities. And I think that is the right message that I think is being ignored for the wrong reasons. They think that vulnerability is weakness, and to show a heroine is weak is to send the wrong message. And I'm saying that's the exact opposite of my conclusion. Show the vulnerability and let's see how she deals with it. And if the story is well told, even if she dies in the end, that still tells us something. She risked herself in this endeavor. The fact that she didn't make it doesn't even make her weak. It might make us say like, man, we need some changes around here, because look what just happened to this person when she stood up for the right cause, So
yeah, I couldn't possibly agree more. I just want to make a quick note though. Is my microphone still sounding good? Because I moved it. I just want to check. Does it still sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I will not get into a rant on this. I'm just going to briefly agree with you. It's just it's so annoying because I understand why it happened culturally, right? Because previously, if you go back and watch movies from several decades ago, you can easily see, okay, we used to show women being often pushovers, and they were not often, they didn't have a lot of agency in the story. In a lot of movies, there was a lot of, they're always there just kind of fainting around and needing help. And I'm not saying every single movie was like that, but that was the norm. And so then people are like, well, let's get rid of that. Let's do these quote unquote strong female characters, where it's just the exact opposite, where it's not humanizing a character to show them never being strong. It's also not humanizing them to show them always being strong. It's like, oh, she's always getting rescued. Oh, now she never needs to be rescued. It's like, no, just show a human. It really irritates me because it's, in my opinion, equally sexist.
I think it is as well. And I take a position on that as a writer. If it's not good writing, then I'm against it.
Yes.
So you know what I'm saying? So because even Luke, Han had to come back and bail him. Dude, Luke Skywalker is Han Solo out manlies him throughout the entire first movie. He's talking down to him. He's taller. He's bigger. The second Luke is thinking about Leia, Han's like, well, maybe I'll go for her. And he's like, oh, and he gets all mad about it. Han's the manly character in that, and Luke is not. And Luke even needs to be saved in order to blow up the Death Star. Han's got to come in and kind of bail him out on that. And this is not uncommon in stories. So the idea that a heroine does not need help or support or saving once in a while, I think is ridiculous. And it doesn't take away anything from her. But I think what you're saying, and you're right, is that if the heroine if it's a reductive portrayal of a heroine in a very clear and overt way, well, then you've got some problems. And that heroine isn't going to stand the test of time, or she's just a prop for the hero.
Right.
And quite honestly, if they're just props, it doesn't make the hero look that great, in my opinion. I think if you have even if the heroine is a secondary character, you can make her awesome and secondary if it's not her story, just like you can have a male character who's secondary and also awesome in a heroine story. I don't know how we've gotten into this black and white thinking. It's such a mess in the story.
And nobody wants this. Like nobody. Well, that's not true. There are some people who want this, but they're in the minority. And it's just mostly, I feel like a lot of people, I don't feel like this problem exists as much in books. I feel like I encounter a lot more nuanced characters when I'm reading novels, but a lot of movies, it just feels like Hollywood's so out of touch with like what normal people relate to and want to see on the screen.
Yeah, they've sealed themselves off somehow and are missing things. And then when the audience doesn't respond favorably, they come up with really bizarre reasons why. It's like there's a lesson to be learned and they learn the wrong lesson over and over again, and it's driving me nuts.
Like there'll be like a Mary Sue type, like one of the kinds of characters we're talking about, where it's just she doesn't grow, she doesn't change, she isn't a character. She's basically a cardboard cut out in the opposite direction. She's maybe not a prop because she has some volition, but she has everything's easy for, it's like a character no one can relate to, no one can be inspired by. And then if anyone says that, then it's like, oh, the fans are just being sexist. It's like, no, you're being sexist with your character.
Yeah, well,
as you can see, I get worked up on this.
Yes, this is
but
this is a recurring
for the right
theme
reason. Well, I think as people who like to write, we love to watch movies and read books too. So there's nothing better than watching one of your favorite movies and reliving every nuanced emotional reaction to your favorite films. Like, oh, here's that part here. Like you can micro experience every second of that story and love it. There's nothing better than that. So when you're watching a movie and they keep jarring you and taking you out of it, it's like, you're depriving yourself of writing better, like a better story. And you're depriving all of us of finding that next hero or heroine that we're looking for, like,
yeah.
I think most men and women alike love male and female heroes and heroines. I don't
most
think
people
we're
aren't
that
sexist like that.
about
It's like
the average person is not.
Storytelling is such a opportunity for connecting with each other as humans. Like you have a character and it doesn't matter. Like this is one of the things I love about storytelling. It doesn't matter what their gender is. It doesn't matter what their background is. It doesn't matter, what their race is, obviously. Like it's just like what their any sort of random thing that you can put on that we use to separate ourselves into categories. When you're watching a good movie or reading a good book, all that goes away and you're connected by the common humanity. And like that's what we should be doing with our characters. If you want to make the world less whatever, insert bigotry type thing, it's like just keep telling good stories about humans. And most people that's just fine. Like we just connect with an interesting person. We don't care about whatever category they're in. And so, but when people act as if we do care so much, it's so insulting and it just reinforces the very problems they're trying to fix.
Well, I do believe it's a phase.
I hope you're right.
I believe it's a phase. I'm sorry,
overcorrection. I said, I hope you're right. I think you are. It's like a pendulum swing. It's the overcorrection that will hopefully balance out. Yeah.
Do you want to?
There's a part of me that thinks this era will be studied.
Well, I think
this era will be studied. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it will. I think it will. Like what is it that was being produced? Why, in the context of our time, what is going on? what the responses were, or but responses were by audiences, what the responses were by executives. Oh, I think it will be. I think this will be a 10 or 15 year period where she set this study. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to go so that look at where you were in the notes, Brianna? About
yes,
I think we got to the refusal of the call, which was like so we were not even the right one yet.
Okay. The next thing, I actually just have a comment that I want to make that is not. Okay. This is real quick, not a question, but I loved the masked minotaur concept, and that like blew my mind because I was like, oh my god, in my novel I have that exact trope. It's really fascinating because I was writing this before studying the hero's journey, so it doesn't really have an intentional hero's journey, but I was looking at, I was like, my story, my novel has elements of both the hero's journey and the heroine's labyrinth, and that's the most obvious one. Is that the villain is just it hits that so perfect. It's like, wow, that is an interesting thing that happens subconsciously. Someone in the native culture that needs to be unmasked. Anyway, I think that's a really cool concept. I just wanted to say that.
Well, awesome! You see it in literature a ton. Like all the old literature with like the Jane Austen novels, stuff, like that is the type of villain without a doubt. They're members of the culture. They're outwardly benevolent, but like secretly tyrannical, and that's a different villain than the kind of villains the heroes tend to face off with.
Yes. And part of an interesting, just a quick aside, I don't want to talk about my own story, but like part of what ends up happening in my novel is that there's almost like the wrong approach to this. Kind of the moral lesson in here is that she doesn't try to unmask the minotaur. She tries a different strategy. She tries revenge, basically, and violence, and that goes poorly.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, that's somewhat of a spoiler, but it's anyway. So I just think that's I love that. That's really inspiring.
Well, Kill Bill does both. She goes on a vengeance tear, and what's interesting is the movie doesn't unmask him until Volume 2. They don't even show you his face.
Oh, that's cool. I can't wait to watch those.
I just had a thought that I have to think much more about this, Doug, in the context of something I was just working with because when I was working with the Rabivania scripts and stuff like that, I like the conflict between the masculine and the feminine is an important theme throughout that entire story. And I have a mythological masculine hero, and I have a mythological. It's still embodied male. It's still male, but he's the feminine. More of the feminine hero, and the masculine hero is the one who confronts the external threats, and I'm realizing that the feminine one was the one who confronted the internal threats. Now it's still through a civil war, but one of them was external focused toward threats to the kingdom, and the other one is dealing with internal corruption and a civil war. I'm gonna have to think more about that.
Why that idea suited to solve those,
and why that came up. So I'm gonna have to think about that a lot more because I wonder why that came into my head.
Right. I mean,
that's what I'm trying to think about and talk a lot like that's the archetype. Why did that come into my head?
Right. If it came into what Doug is saying is correct, which it probably is, but it I'm not saying if as with doubt, but I'm just saying assuming that it is an archetype that is universal, then it would have come into your head for the same reason it would have come into any other writer's head.
Exactly.
So it's just really intriguing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I didn't invent the Heroine's Labyrinth. I'd be an idiot to think I could design. Right. I just found it on accident and then put it together, and now I'm like totally excited about it. And because it solves. There was movies I had watched when I was a kid that did not fit into the hero's journey, no matter how hard I stretched those themes. They did not fit. And now I could go back. I'm like, oh my God, this fits the Heroine's Labyrinth. And now I feel like vindicated. Like there was a structure there. This wasn't an anomaly or anything.
Well, I know. This like, dang, I'm sitting here as listening to this. I'm like, oh, so that's why the first one, the book that I was working on, that I was talking to Cameron with, that's the hero's journey because he's the masculine king, masculine themed king. And then the other mythological king is the feminine themed king, and he's dealing with the internal state of the kingdom. And so I'm like, you're going, oh my God. So he should follow the heroine's Labyrinth arc. I'm going to think more about that. Wow. Okay.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Quick aside, there is
nothing less heroic. Yeah. No, go ahead.
No, finish your thought.
I was just going to say there is nothing less heroic about the Heroine's Labyrinth versus the hero's journey. I love both of them, and the more I've studied heroines, the more I really appreciate the nuances and complexity of this model and what these heroines and males. There's plenty of male characters that follow this, plenty, but I'm naming it after heroines because it is the heroine that has shown me this. And I find both to be extremely heroic and in totally different ways. I love it.
It feels like there's a little bit of like almost like a language limitation here. Cause at first this kind of bothered me because it's like hero's journey sounds more gender neutral, but Heroine's Labyrinth sounds more specifically to women. But I was trying to think like, is there another way to word this? I just don't think English gives you that option. So it's like, that makes sense. And I think everyone understands. It's like, yeah, maybe this is, it can apply to men as well. But
I wanted to, that's come up a lot.
Yeah. Well, and I think for the most part, for the discussions that we've been having in this whole series as part of Table Talk, that it's come up multiple times that when we're talking about archetypically masculine or archetypically feminine, we are not necessarily meaning that is solely male or female embodied. So it's a more
Rambo First Blood. Yeah. Rambo follows a Heroine's Labyrinth tale. I mean, he is clearly fighting his native culture. The Masked Minotaurs, a social apex. Like it has a lot of almost all these tropes. Fight Club. I mean, there's some very manly films that follow the Heroine's Labyrinth. So, like I said, I named it after the heroine because she's, the heroine is who showed me this. And, if the hero's journey has kind of a male slant and the Heroine's Labyrinth has a female slant, that's fine. But I think writers, when they're ready to write, will not worry so much about the gendered language and focus more on the archetypes.
Yeah. That leads to an interesting question. Huh?
I was saying, okay, yeah, excellent. No, yeah. No, I was going to go on.
I was thinking, I feel like that leads into maybe jumping to a different question I have, and then I'll come back to kind of so here's a thought that I have. Because you're just mentioning.
Wait, hold on, Brianna. We just got a super chat. Let's before you start on that, because Sable Phoenix. Thank you so much for the super chat, Sable Phoenix. Sable Phoenix is one of our regulars here on the channel, so thank you very much for the super chat.
Sable Phoenix has a lot of awesome stuff in the chat.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Sable Phoenix and is often here with us on very frequently on the morning grind as well. Have you looked at East Asian concepts of yin and yang as it relates to this? What you're exploring here is intrinsic to that worldview. I guess, Doug?
I have not thought about that. That would be a very interesting framework to apply both models in terms of opposing forces in a sense, but needed because I think the yin and the yang, and sounds like Sable Phoenix would know this better than me, but they're both necessary. It's not like good and evil. It's opposing forces that are both necessary and at different times
and have a little bit of each other in. Yeah.
Well, that's what I was about to say too.
They each contain a piece of the other two, which I think is interesting because you got a little dot, so it's not like a complete binary, which I think is really cool.
Yes, I think that's awesome too. That's super interesting to try to think of it structurally as just opposing forces, not good and evil necessarily, but opposing forces in terms of archetypal patterns. I don't think I've ever thought of that. That's pretty interesting.
Oh man,
that's very interesting.
So I have.
Okay.
Then this leads
you have. Awesome.
This leads perfectly into what I was just about to want to talk about, which is
good job.
I want to talk.
All right, excellent.
Thank you, Sable Phoenix, because I want to talk a little bit about masculine and feminine, because like I was saying earlier, my interest in talking about feminine heroes and what that looks like, and part of my question was like, okay, does a feminine hero have a different kind of arc versus a masculine hero? And what I've come to realize is probably not, because it seems like what you're describing is not only that it can work for male or female, but also masculine or feminine, because you're mentioning characters that are going through the Heroine's Labyrinth, but they're also using violence, and that the opposite is also true, right? Because the hero's journey can be a warrior, but it's also can be like the world redeemer type character or the saint type character. You think about like the Buddha, or even I think Jesus. I think both of their stories follow the hero's journey too. And so that you could have sort of a feminine or masculine nature on either. But then it's like, what is that? So I want to put this sort of an aside, but I think it's interesting and relevant. Kind of my very in progress thoughts on what those two might be. Let me share my screen here, because I would love to know what both of you think about this. Yeah, hold on a sec. Share my screen. Okay. Where is it? There it is. All right, can you all see my screen?
I can. Now we can. I added it.
Okay, sweet. Heath had.
You may, if you can zoom in a little bit. We
yeah. Hold on. How do I zoom?
Say fit.
Is that better?
Oh no, there you go. That's better. Yeah, it's better. Okay.
Okay, perfect. So I was just kind of going through, and some of this was inspired by some of the stuff you've said, Doug. Some of this is also inspired by a book that I'm reading, which I'll come back to, which is the Heroine with 1,001 Faces, which I'm very early into. I've only read like a chapter.
I've read it by Maria Chittar.
Yeah. I'm sure you have. I was like, I'm sure that was part of your research. But yeah. So I'll kind of go through some of these. It's just like some thoughts on, and this is not about the structure, but in terms of what I would call a masculine or feminine character, right? So I'm thinking, you've got kind of like the difference between the projecting or the providing kind of nature versus the like nurturing or protecting. So these are kind of like the fatherly versus the motherly archetype. This right here, I think, is really relevant to storytelling. So I think about the courage to fight versus the courage to speak, because that's something that is mentioned in that book about like these characters are, they're like, related to unmasking the Minotaur. You're standing up and saying something, and you're drawing attention to something that's wrong. Also there's the coalition built, which is kind of separate, but I put them together. The sort of like the monster taming as opposed to the monster slaying. So I think archetypically of, there's a hero that's faced with a dragon. What do they do? If they kill the dragon, they're embodying a more masculine archetype. If they then go and like free the dragon, break its spell and turn it into, a beautiful young guy or something, then that's to them doing something more feminine, right? Or they're befriending it and making it, changing its nature, kind of a thing. This one, I was thinking, this was related to what we were talking about earlier with rebellion. I think about a masculine character, especially like in old myths. They're the ones that are founding the kingdom. Maybe they're, someone's taken their throne and they have to come back and reclaim it. So there's a lot of like sort of empire building or like, the sort of direct political power kind of stuff. Versus I think about feminine characters being more likely to, instead of building the empire, point out what's wrong in the empire and break down what is oppressive. And so there's more of like the standing against injustice and things like that. But glory seeking, justice seeking, this is kind of loose, like making a name for oneself in the world, as opposed to like improving the world, fixing what's broken, building a house versus making a home. That's very male, female, but I think it's also masculine, feminine when you think about kind of traditional divisions of labor. Competition versus kindness, like how, and again, that would be another character thing, like how you're solving certain problems. And then the final one that I put here would be like, because I think creativity might, I don't know if this is true, but it might have kind of a masculine aspect and a feminine aspect. Like I put like chaos versus order, which is something Jordan Peterson talks about like, converting the wilderness or raw materials into tools, into society. So it's kind of like that ordering creativity versus the more like intuitive or the spontaneous generation. I kind of associate that with like spirituality, enlightenment, bringing of life, and that there's a maybe more chaotic nature to that. I went through that really fast. But I'm excited. But what do you guys think about that in general? Just like,
Heath, do you want to go first?
No, you can put it all. Look, you can see it all at once. There we go.
No, well, I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Because it's not like we're saying that every one of these has to be these things. Because I'm thinking about different things about.
And real life humans are always going to have aspects of both, right?
Well, right.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
because like the masculine, feminine, glory seeking versus justice seeking. That was the one that stands out to me as the weirdest.
Yeah, that might be
would
kind
say-
of weirdly worded.
So I would, and so I've thought about some of these things because I've begun to rethink the hero's journey. Now that I have this other context with the Heroine's Labyrinth. And you say glory seeking. I think that is this is just my take, and these are early thoughts. I would say competence seeking, and if you're highly competent, you tend to get accolades. And the reason, and I'm not saying that women aren't competent. That's not what I'm trying to say. No. I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is, like, even like when I've played in sports and things like, there's a certain, you have to get the job done. You got to get this right. Even like when you're working out, sometimes you're training, lift, bar, push, thing, and that's the only thing you're focused on. Like, do this one thing right. And I think that those are competency issues. And that's why the reason I've zeroed in on that word is because in the hero's journey with the mentor figure, there's a lot of focus on competency for the young hero. Or the immature hero trying to learn. You have to become competent. If you think about Luke Skywalker, again, he was incompetent. He left his training early. He was doing the handstand. Then he falls over, and Yoda's like, "Oh, Jesus, you're a mess. You can't do it. You can't stay focused. You can't become competent if you can't do these things."
Nico suggests proving competence instead of competence seeking, proving confidence. I do like that.
That might be good.
That might be better.
But it is thinking about, but you're also trying to become competent, I think, sometimes.
Yes.
Too, so.
But then also seeking to demonstrate that. I like the demonstration of that, because that was why that line was weird, because Luke Skywalker didn't blow up the Death Star for glory. He got glory.
Right. He got it, though. So I think, I'll say, like, in that 1,000. Say that again.
I said that wasn't the glory wasn't the purpose. He wasn't going out there.
Yeah,
okay, right.
That's a good point.
I think, and this is just my take. So when I read Maria's book, 1,000, and there's a couple of books that I've read where they get the hero's journey kind of wrong. They're kind of mischaracterizing it. There's another book that I've read, and the author, she has some brilliant things in there, but when she talks about the hero's journey, they're laughably terrible takes. It's like, oh yeah, it's all about poking things, and I'm like, that is not what the hero's journey is about. But when people misunderstand what the hero is doing, they'll focus on the accolade, the glory, and say, oh, well, that's what the hero wants. He's after glory. It's like, no, glory was the byproduct of an extremely competent series of events. And by the way, after he's awarded, he might have another thing that comes up, and he's not going to solve it. He's got to re-engage and relearn a new set of competencies. But anyway, that's why I've zeroed on that one word when I've rethought the hero's journey.
That's a really good comment, because that was what stood out to Heath as being off. And so that was,
it sounds
I have to think about how to word that, but sorry.
I was going to say creative force. I really love how you put it on both. When I've been exploring, the most complex part of the Heroine's Labyrinth is the sacred fire, because it fans out and has different meanings to different parts of this, to different characters in the story. And when I thought about the sacred fire in the hero's journey, I realized it's also there, but it has a completely different meaning. In fact, wilderness, raw materials and the tools, society structure. Yeah. So obviously male characters or masculinity can be very creative as well. I always think about, did you ever see the movie Amadeus?
No.
Oh, it's one of the best movies. It's one of my all-time favorites. It focuses on Mozart it's actually a Heroine's Labyrinth story as told by the Minotaur, and it's fantastic. But it focuses on Mozart, and he's incredibly creative. He's so creative. So he's able to build this thing. So I decided sacred fire is what I call you use the exact language, a creative force that attracts in the Heroine's Labyrinth. It attracts the Minotaur. And the Minotaur wants to capture that creative force one way or the other. With male characters, it tends to come out in terms of ethics. And I think it's interesting because fire can either burn you or warm you. It can bring light or it can be a destructive force. So a lot of heroes focus heavily on how are you going to use your power destructively or creatively. And the good guys are always taught to be ethical with their creative force, their ability to build instead of to destroy. That doesn't seem to show up in Heroine stories so much. The ethics of force, like the Karate Kid, Star Wars is an obvious. This, are you going to be Cobra Kai or Miyagi-Do? Are you going to be a Sith or a Jedi? You know, this sort of either or with your creative powers. So I love seeing that because I feel like I'm on a similar dichotomy that you've got set up.
I'm a big fan in also the storytelling that I'm thinking about and working on, the masculine and feminine again, and both of their creative forces. So I also like that.
I was thinking of you with that because you were talking about that once. So I was like, I was thinking of you when I wrote that. Yeah.
That both the masculine and the feminine have a creative force. And I also think it's interesting that they destroy what the other one creates. Archetypically, they also are
I didn't even notice that.
They're supposed to destroy what the other one creates, because archetypically, and I'm speaking only archetypically here, that if the masculine side is the creator of civilization, then what is the destroyer of civilization? The feminine.
Well, it's not the destroyer of civilization. It's the improver. And no. But this is important because they're rebels, yes, but it's about improving civilization, because I think
there is a concept called creative destruction.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes you have to destroy some things to build up.
Well, to Heath's point,
burn the weeds, you know. Yeah, so maybe that's a good point.
To Heath's point, what I would call Act 3 of the Heroine's Labyrinth, I call the rearrangement or the permutation, which is the heroic actions of the heroine end up rearranging the society, either just a household or the civilization as a whole. So there is a creative destructive element to it, but it's not necessarily like the heroine is destroying what the guy built.
Right. Well, that goes back to building a house versus making a home, which is like the tiniest version of that archetype, I feel like. Where it's like, the masculine force is building this thing, and the feminine force makes it a place you actually want to be.
Whatever I set up in the room, my wife will come by and change it all. So,
yeah. And then what the feminine creates, particularly life, when you're talking about combat and war, that's what the masculine destroys.
I do believe that's archetypal. Yeah.
So
it might be. And so I have another thought. I don't want to get too deep into this rabbit hole, but you just gave me a thought, because I love also thinking about.
Yeah, we got to read that.
Yeah. What's that?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Finish your thought. Then we'll go to Sable.
Yeah, because there is a, you can think about not just the raw masculine and feminine, which I feel like these kind of things go very well into the yin and the yang, which is why I was bringing that up, like that these two forces, I think you'll find them in all sorts of different cultures, but that there's also like a healthy and unhealthy version of both, that there is an excessive, a lot of people hate the term toxic masculinity, but that's all that people are talking about. They're talking about the sort of the darker side of it, versus there's also the darker side of the feminine. I've been thinking about both of those a lot, and super fun to think about. But you could say that when you have the darker aspect of either, that's when they might come more into conflict, and that's when the other might balance that one out. So if you have too much of one, then you need the other to kind of bring it to its good form. Because I think if they're balanced properly, if the two should work together very well. So for example, you have, like, again, speaking archetypically, say you have a terrible place you don't want to live in. The feminine might be the force that points out what's wrong, and the masculine, that says this guy's a tyrant, that speaks up, right? And then the masculine comes and destroys the tyrant, right? And or they could work together in a sense of like, there's weeds, the feminine burns them, the masculine puts something new in its place. And so so I feel like they kind of work together, I think, if they're healthy.
Think of the most ancient labyrinth story there is, Minos and the Minotaur. It is Theseus who slays the Minotaur, but it is Ariadne who solves the maze.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, that fits into so perfectly. All right, so he had a you have a
Sable
comment
Phoenix
from Sable?
says, I think Sable really likes this structure you've got here, Brianna. Sable Phoenix says, exactly, masculine yang pushes outward, shapes the external world to its whims, wards, i.e. competency. Feminine yin pulls inward, draws what it wants to itself, builds, nurturing.
That's beautiful. I love that. Okay, real quickly, I want to give a couple. Cool. I did. This is a very, very incomplete list,
awesome,
just to show
Sable.
a few. We've got some, it's very easy to think of the male examples of, the masculine, right? That's very classic. Some female examples, of course. I thought of, Katniss Everdeen, Buffy, the Vampire Slayer, Camilla from the Aeneid, maybe some Goddesses of War, I'm not sure. And then over here, I feel like you see this to show that you can have male or female of both, right? You've got your the feminine, female examples are easy to think of. You got like Belle and Beauty and the Beast. You've got Anne of Green Gables, Pollyanna, Bella Swan from Twilight, Alice in Wonderland. I want to talk about Alice in Wonderland again later. Moana. Male examples, I was saying like Jesus and Buddha. I couldn't think of any modern examples. I put Forrest Gump as a question mark because I feel like part of him is that he just wants to take care of people around him, and he's very he strikes me as being more of that kind of a character. But anyway, this is just an incomplete example to show, to kind of demonstrate that it's not male, female, it's masculine, feminine. So yeah, anyway.
Very cool. Sharing. I love that breakdown.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I'm glad that tracks, because I've been trying for a while to come up with a list, and then it just kind of clicked for me the other day. So
yeah. I love it. I think that's great because people are obviously intrigued by this. And quite honestly, I think it resonates with people. Masculinity and femininity to varying degrees, and sometimes for different, now that I've identified it, like the Shield Maiden moment, when I see it in a story, sometimes I get like a little emotional zing because it's so heroic, and I've analyzed it so much that when it comes up, I'm like, oh man, that the red line has been drawn. She's not letting them by. And I love it now. It's extremely heroic, and it doesn't. You actually said something, Brianna, in a previous video. I heard it on the next day, I think. Yeah. You said there's great power in that, in just stopping, even if you don't have the physical ability or warrior combat capacity to fight the Minotaur, just standing there and subjecting yourself to the fury that might come your way. Huge power in that. And when you said that, I actually liked your wording a lot. I have a subheader even in the book called, the shield as a weapon, meaning the shield becomes the thing, even though it's not used like a sword would be used, it becomes the thing that the Minotaur shatters against. So in that sense, it's a weapon. It is the thing that the Minotaur, now that he's unmasked and now that the red line has been drawn, the Minotaur it falls into the abyss of the shield in a sense. So I love that. I love the way you worded it. There's great power in that, because you recognize that even though it's not single combat necessarily, even without the combat, the symbolism is already there, so
right, because it was because now she's forcing him to either reveal that he's to show how horrible he is, or he has to stop, and that either way it kind of gets what she wants, I suppose, even though she may be
what's
sacrificing her life.
When I was writing my book, I deliberately removed all the physicality. I wanted my heroine to do nothing combat oriented. There's a couple moments where I took it all out, and she became far more intriguing without there's no roundhouses, there's no punches or kicks. Not lifting
you mean
guys
you
up
can
and
do
throwing
that?
them. Yeah,
you can have an interesting female character who doesn't punch people. What?
She was actually the chapters were better. The writing improved when I took that out. When my mind said that there should be a showdown, there should be a fight here. I went all Heroine's Labyrinth with it, and I stripped it down to the basic symbolism. And I thought all the writing, all the chapters got better in those scenes where I took it out. And then I added a level of physicality for the Shield Maiden moment, and that scene got better. So yeah, you don't have to be a warrior in order to make a stand or to be heroic. And like I said, I don't see it as lesser or greater anymore. I'm seeing it as two parallels, probably to what Sable Phoenix is saying, this idea of a yin and a yang. One can be more dominant than the other, but it's never one size fits all.
Yeah. Cool.
We got about 10 more minutes. Do you want to?
Oh, we have to.
I don't know. I don't have to stop, but I know that you cleared some of your schedule to be here tonight, so you can keep going. Can you keep going?
I can. What about you, Doug?
I can keep going. In fact, tonight's one of the better nights for me than normal, that I don't have anything in the morning.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Well then,
good, because I still have more things I want to discuss.
All right.
All right. Let me go back to my notes. Let's go back to, so we briefly mentioned this. I feel like we kind of already talked about this, but the idea of using speech as a form of power, I feel like we already talked about that. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to say on that, but I wanted to briefly mention a really cool example. I guess it's cool. I don't know how I feel about this movie. Have you seen The Nightingale?
I haven't.
Yeah, so it's
by
hard
Hannah,
for me to recommend.
By Kristen Hannah?
I forget. She's the same one that did The Babadook. She's the same director. Same writer-director as The Babadook. There's another movie called The Nightingale.
No, I haven't seen it.
This one is historical fiction set in it's not in Australia. It's one of those islands down there. I forget which one. But
New Zealand maybe?
Not New Zealand. What's the other one there? That's just south. I'm forgetting the name of it. Anyway, it's a very disturbing movie, and it's hard to watch because it's really, really violent, and you are wanting revenge that isn't exactly, you don't exactly get the catharsis you're craving. So I have mixed feelings about the movie, but it's really interesting. I feel like you should watch it because it's an interesting example of some of the things you talked about. The Nightingale. Yeah. It's hard. I just have to say it's a hard watch. It's difficult because you are expecting a certain thing, and it isn't like she doesn't use the sort of traditional masculine things in the end. She uses the power of speech. She uses this she has sort of an unmasking the Minotaur moment. And you don't think that's what she's going to do, but she changes her mind. Because the violence ends up being too hard for her to do. Like she makes an act of violence. She has I'm kind of spoiling it a little bit, but she has enough hatred in her and pain to do one horrible act of violence, and she can't after that. She can't do it. She's too traumatized. So she does other strategies basically to deal with what's happened. And so it's a really intriguing example of that, of speech. But I was just wondering if you had any other thoughts on that, of the
I did. In fact, the book Jane Eyre.
I love that one.
I believe
so much.
speech. What's that?
That's one of my favorites.
So I believe speech is her sacred fire, because the book goes out of its way to talk about how plain looking she is. And I think that was done intentionally because it forces the reader to downgrade our opinion of her eros, what I call her sex appeal or her beauty, and the impact that's having on the other characters. Because it's like, well, she's plain. So it's like, okay. So it just downgrades that appeal, right? But every time she talks in that book, even to me, the reader, it's pretty mesmerizing. Her language is fantastic. And she captivates not only me, the reader. That shows you how good of an author the author is to not just tell you people were captivated when she spoke. You're captivated when you're she's so articulate and she's so intelligent, well-spoken.
Yeah. She's a great heroine. I love her.
Yes. And she just stops everyone. Every time she speaks, she stops everyone in their tracks and always seems to have an immediate upper hand. No matter how quietly she says it, doesn't matter. It's an immediate establishment of dominance in a sense. It's a dominance of ideas or an ethical premise or a position. And she's not loud. She's never shouting. And everyone reacts to her speech. So I found Jane Eyre to be one of the books that I read that I was like, man, the speech of the heroine is the most powerful part of her character. So I wrote that down and made a note of it. I was like, her sacred fire is her speech. It's everyone recognizes it the second she talks.
That's cool.
Even the reader.
Yeah. Oh, Sable Phoenix, thank you, Tasmania. That's what I was trying to
Oh, is
remember.
it Tasmania? Okay.
Tasmania.
Sable Phoenix comes to the rescue. Yes, that was the island. Yes.
Hey,
Sable is on point.
Yeah, I do want. I want to go back to a small point. I don't want to dwell on it, but James Bacon, one of our channel members who is also frequently here. Thank you so much, James. James says it's a positive negative inversion, talking about men and women. Men can protect and invade. Women can order and cast disarray. So yes, we're talking about the creativity versus destruction of men and women. And I was just going to add a final clarification to my point that archetypically we have several different stories where men are living in a state of perfection until the arrival of women. And so that's women bringing disarray in. Obviously, Adam in the Garden of
Pandora's
Eden.
box.
Pandora is the other one. Yeah, men live there because Pandora is the first woman. Eve was the first woman.
Women get blamed for a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing is with those stories, though, I feel like those stories are also kind of sexist, and they're coming from pretty sexist societies. So that is another side point.
Well, it could be, but I also think there's something deeper there, because there are also stories and a classic part of guys growing up when, like, stories about where guys are in a band. Like you're living the perfect band life in the summer, whatever. You've got your group of guys. And some guys will probably back me up on this, that you're living a great life with all of your guys, and then what happens? One of them gets a girlfriend. And
but you can also blame that on competition amongst the guys.
And well, like Yoko Ono, that there is a rival of the feminine, and that it breaks apart what that group of guys have. And so that's why I wouldn't be so quick to just reject something like the story of Pandora or the story of Adam and Eve, because there could be that psychological that guys have we're this group of guys, we all hang out, and then all of a sudden the discovery of the feminine, the discovery of women, one of them gets a girlfriend, and then what happens to your band after that happens?
Well, I'll say this.
Break apart.
I don't think we should ignore any myths. Like, even if they might appear to be sexist or are sexist, like even with Adam and Eve, believe it or not.
Yeah, I don't say we should ignore them. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I wasn't even trying to say that you had said that. What I meant is there's always something to pull out of it, but sometimes we might pull out the wrong lesson. Like in my opinion, like the Adam and Eve story, Eve was always blamed for a moral failing for refusing the temptation to eat the apple. But with the Heroine's Labyrinth, and I actually studied the poison apple, not even looking at Genesis, I got there, the devil, or Satan, is a perfect masked minotaur. He's half man, half beast. He's masked and disguised. And my whole point was, if you understand what the archetype of the poison apple is a weapon. And it's delivered as an attack on the heroine, and it's given to her deceptively. There's lies involved, and she usually trusts to some extent the person who's telling her this, or believes it to be true. She's deceived. So to me, the poison apple is an attack of deception, and that indicts the minotaur, not the heroine, in my opinion. So depending on how you look at it, you could say, well, it was Eve's fault, or you could say Eve was attacked with a poisoned apple. And this, I think that should at least be taken into account to that particular archetypal story, for example.
Right. Well, I think we should talk about that more. So I just, we'll leave that. I'm perfectly happy to leave that here. And
no, it's very interesting. I've heard this topic
because I'm not.
It's a deep one. Yeah,
I have more to say on that, but I think that would be beside our main topic tonight. So let's go ahead, Brianna. Continue.
All right. Back to the notes. Oh, we already talked about that. Going on. I already talked about that. Cool. Okay. I wanted to talk about Alice in Wonderland, but specifically, and I'm glad because I wanted to talk about the difference between masculine and feminine first. And so we've already kind of established that a story can be both, and so I won't go into that. But a really interesting thing that is related to all this has to do with the first Disney, animated version of Alice in Wonderland, and then the Tim Burton live action one. How familiar are either of you with both? I'm more familiar with the latter one, but I just want to see if that's a conversation.
Familiar.
I don't know that I've ever seen the Tim Burton one, and it's been a long time since I've seen the Disney.
Oh,
I reviewed the old Alice in Wonderland semi-recently for this book, but I don't know it as intimately as I might know other stories.
Sure. I mean, same. I don't know them that intimately either. But one of the things I think is really interesting, and maybe this is just a side comment, maybe not much of a discussion, but that I feel like kind of embodies at least what I've been talking about with sort of this denigration of femininity, is that, you know, the original Alice in Wonderland is she's very much a feminine character. Like, no matter how you want to define it, you know, like she's using, another one that was mentioned before as kind of like a feminine trait might be like curiosity and like trying to figure things out. And, you know, there's like like I think you're talking about like the different rooms and the guardians, and, you know, you're like solving problems and puzzles, and that kind of a thing is common. And you know, and so it's that kind of a story. It's very whimsical, whatever. And then the Tim Burton live action Alice in Wonderland story is that they bring basically the younger version of Alice has grown up and she's an adult, and she comes back into Wonderland, and they have a completely new story, sort of, kind of, where she has to go and defeat a dragon, and it's the Jabberwocky is a dragon basically, and they make her go through this sort of soldier warrior journey, and it's framed so much to me like it's like this improvement, and I think that's just as an example of this just kind of pissing me off, where it's like, why can't you just have the same as like Galadriel? It's like, why can't we just have this feminine hero? And
well,
it's weird.
You know what? You're totally right. I would say this: let time work its magic. The beautiful, undeniable power of archetypes is that they live on. So if I had to ask you to bet $1,000 on which story is going to live on, the Tim Burton version or the original, which do you think is going to make it?
Oh, the original by far. Yeah.
So all this crap they're putting out now, it works, and it works because of its archetypal power. You could certainly play with it. You can have a different take on it. But when you move too far away from the archetypal power, like Alice is not on a hero's journey. Like, if you understand, this is just my point of view, that the hero's journey is meant to be a shadow of a soldier's journey, which is a very scary thing when you really try to take that in. That's not what Alice is doing. So Tim, who's got my last name, by the way, I need to. Yeah. I love the Batman, but my point is, like, if you don't understand the archetypes that you're playing with, changing them out, you're going to have probably disastrous results. So you're right. Turning her into the soldier on the journey when she tumbled into a rabbit hole in her backyard, not unlike Sarah from Labyrinth or Ophelia from Pan's Labyrinth. I call it in my book the fantastical maze at home, or even Lucy in Chronicles of Narnia, you know, or Claire in Outlander. You know, they find these fantastical worlds there just outside the home. That works. The original Alice, that premise works. Turning her into a soldier does not. And so the other one will fade.
It's not the right kind of story. Yeah. So that's interesting. Anyway, I guess that wasn't going to be much of a discussion, but go ahead.
We should just put an asterisk here that this subject is one that we want to return to when we study Sleeping Beauty, because I have an interest in studying Sleeping Beauty, and I talked to Doug about that, and Brianna said she'd like to be on this conversation as well. So one right there, we should pick up on with Sleeping Beauty, because that has a lot of.
We should. I'll just throw this out there, but we should consider the original Sleeping Beauty and also the first Maleficent.
That's exactly what I was thinking. That's exactly what I was thinking.
This is an example, right? Because we'll come back to that. I won't.
We'll come back to that. Yeah, because I like to study Sleeping Beauty specifically and relate that also to Maleficent. So footnote there. That's a good for another conversation.
That's a great one.
So I guess another just a random side note, which most of what I was wanting to ask we've already addressed, but Moana I think is a great example too, of because she probably does both. She definitely follows a hero's journey, and she probably follows yours journey too. I didn't really break it down, but she's also very much a feminine hero. You know, at the end, they try to use the masculine, way to defeat this this goddess, and they can't do it, and she has to use the healing power to do it as well. And so
Moana's one of my favorites.
Well, now, all right. I mean, I'm not prepared to go into this in great detail at the moment, but one of the interesting things that, like when I was talking to Lou about Moana, was that it's just a remake of A New Hope of Star Wars. That one of the things that Moana, I guess that surprises me, because Moana seems to be a remake of Star Wars. And Lou, so we have to talk with Lou about that. He's like, look at this, boom, boom, and he just breaks it down. It's like, listen, everything's
well, isn't he just
Wars, boom, boom, boom.
Isn't
boom,
he just identifying that it's the same kind of archetypal story on a certain level?
I would.
Well, that's what I would say, that it would be the hero's journey then. Right? Yeah. This
it is
the hero's journey,
because it's the hero's journey. It's probably both, but it's definitely the hero's journey.
Both.
Yeah.
Moana's got both. She does not defeat the villain in combat.
Yeah, but I mean, the hero's journey doesn't have to involve defeating the villain in combat. That's why I say, like,
it doesn't, but it usually does. Right.
I mean,
well, but wait a minute. But so I think what was going on there, and I said
usually
that should be an interesting one to get deeper into as well. But doesn't she end up using the magic power to defeat the bad guy
in Moana?
Okay.
So but she doesn't defeat him. She doesn't defeat the bad guy. Basically, the villain. This is the dark goddess, or it's like this dark goddess character who needs this. I can't remember exactly how it works, but she has a stone that then transforms her into. It's kind of like when I was talking about
It's the Puanu stone, the green Puanu stone.
It's very much the sort of dark feminine versus divine feminine, which when people talk about the two sides of feminine, there's usually the terms they use. That's very much what happens with this goddess, where she then turns into a life-bringing goddess. And so she needed to be healed. She needed the feminine power, basically. But so that's kind of what I would put forth as an example of, she is following the hero's journey, I think, but she's doing it in a feminine way. Yeah, that's what I would say. What do you think?
So we should think about a discussion about Moana too, because I use Moana a ton.
Well, then I'll tell Lou. I'll tell Lou specifically, get in here and talk about Moana with us.
Yeah, bring him in.
Because
do a 4-person.
There are things about Moana that are classic Heroine's Labyrinth elements, tons of it. And in fact, I believe Moana is a story about two heroines. Te Fiti is the goddess who has her sacred fire stolen from her. And that causes her to become a villain. And it is Moana who returns the sacred fire, and that's what turns her back. And
that's cool.
It's actually pretty awesome when you think about it like that. And Maui, who would be the villain of the Te Fiti, is actually the beast as ally to Moana.
Yes.
And he's a perfect beast as ally. He turns into beasts. I mean, he literally is back and forth. But we could talk about that at another time. But
I'm gonna text Lou. I'm gonna text Lou and say, all right, we got to bring in. We'll bring out the big guns on a Moana.
There's even like the breadcrumbs. There's even the breadcrumbs with the seashells the conch shells into the ocean. Anyway, Moana's awesome, and there is hero's journey stuff in there. I'm not saying it's not.
Yeah, but, so I mean, I like the idea that a story can be both, because that really solves so much of the things that was discordant for me, where I was like not quite on the same page. And I think I can buy that because I feel like a story can be so many things at once. It can have different elements of different things. So that's not too hard. Excuse me, that's not too hard for me to buy.
Well, think about Ripley. She has to defeat two villains. There's the one villain from her native culture, Burke. She has to unmask him and defeat him. And then she's also left home and gone far away and she has to fight the Queen Alien. She has to defeat both. And she does it in both movies. In Alien, Ash has to be unmasked. He's a member of the native culture. And then she has to defeat the alien. So there's a masked Minotaur and there's a distant dragon. And Ripley pulls double duty in both movies.
That's cool.
Probably why we love both of those movies. Ripley is one of my favorite heroines, by the way. She's awesome.
Same.
And she does some hero's journey work and she does some Heroine's Labyrinth work. But it's important to note that she deals with two villains in both of her two classic films.
All right, let me see what else I have written. I think we've gotten through most of my. Okay. So here's an interesting one. So there's something that you said, kind kind of an offhand comment where you mentioned that the Heroine's Labyrinth is good for sort of more non-linear stories. But then the way it's laid out, it sounds like you're laying it out in a linear way, but maybe I'm misunderstanding that. So I'd love to hear you go into that some more.
So I believe that same thing with the hero's journey. There's the ideal.
Okay.
And the ideal is easiest to understand. Well, the easiest way to make to have anyone understand it is to set out an ideal version of it. And I think that's done linearly, at least with the hero's journey. When I started working on the Heroine's Labyrinth, I can't wait till the book comes out because I'm doing something very unique with story structure with it. I really was bothered by the idea of linear storytelling as a pure sense, because I feel like in a lot of stories, it was out of order. That's true with the hero's journey too. In some cases, there's themes that are skipped. There's themes that are out of order. It's really up to the writer to know what to do and how to handle the archetypes as they come up in the story. What I did in my book is I say this in the preface actually, is that I'm not a big fan of story structure. And when I was analyzing heroine-centric stories, it seemed like the archetypal power came to the heroine, sometimes in a unique order. And I likened it to the turning of a tarot card, meaning you have a tarot card when it's presented to you has massive archetypal power loaded in it. It's full of symbolism. The symbols have meaning, and it's up to the fortune teller or the person reading the card to interpret that archetypal power as it relates to you, who's getting the reading done to them. I don't think it's that different in your stories. So to me, I write the book this way. Every chapter has a new tarot card that's flipped with like the Masked Minotaur is a card. The Labyrinth is a card. The Sacred Fire is a card. So each turning of the card is its own archetypal self-contained power. And you as a writer have to interpret that as it pertains to your character. So it's almost like a tarot reading, but for your character. Here's the archetypal power here. Here's the archetypal power here. So to me, it is somewhat nonlinear. I felt it was my job as a writer of a nonfiction writer to present it in a way that was easiest to understand, with the caveat that it does not have to be in this order, or not all of these themes have to be present in your story. You could skip a theme, or as Brianna is pointing out, you can even include themes from like the hero's journey. These other themes could come in. So it's almost like you could take the Heroine's Labyrinth deck and the hero's journey deck, shuffle them together, and then start seeing what comes up in your story as you go. And I think now that I've written a story, and Brianna, now that you've written a story, that's how we synthesize our chapters anyway. I don't go into it saying, okay, this has to be this theme. It's kind of like a background app. And I'm imagining the theme as I would want to watch it, like in a movie or read it in a comic book panel. And then you start to write it, and the hero's journey or the Heroine's Labyrinth are like benchmarks. It's like, okay, maybe there should be. Does a mentor figure make sense? Yes, it does. I'm going to have a mentor figure, and then that character materializes. I have a mentor figure in Faraway Bird, and she's awesome.
I love that. Just a quick insert. I love the thinking about it that way. Does insert trope make sense to the story?
Yeah.
And then
Well, and because when you like in a tarot reading, the archetypal power comes up randomly. And yet the I hate saying fortune teller, that sounds like the 1800s or something, but the person doing
the reader, I don't know,
has to interpret that archetypal content in the narrative of the person who's getting the tarot reading done to them. It has to be contextualized. So to me, I think that's how writers synthesize their stories anyway. And I think that's why the hero's journey has repeated itself accidentally over multiple writers in different eras, different cultures, because they have followed this archetypal pattern as it comes up. So in terms of the order it has to be in, I don't think it has to be in any order. I wrote the book in what I think is the most logical order, but I made it clear in my book too that don't let logic ruin your storytelling. Follow the order that comes up, as the story progresses. What is the archetypal event that makes the most sense as you go?
Okay, we just got a super chat.
Oh, okay.
Perfect timing. Oh, Sable Phoenix again. Thank you so much, Sable Phoenix.
Sable's
You've been very generous.
It's Fable is basically just the fourth person in this conversation.
So yes, and Sable Phoenix was definitely liking the story as tarot, saying story as tarot. Where do you from where you dream by Robert Olin Butler, one of the best books on plotting a story I've ever read. You all would probably love it.
I'm looking it up right now.
That already sounds right to me because I define archetypes as something we recognize even in dreams. And that's what the title sounds like to me. And that's Sable Phoenix. That's awesome. That's an awesome recommendation.
I'll
interesting.
Load that up to look at on Amazon after this. Thank you very much for that recommendation.
Cool.
I'm gonna look that up right away. That's probably really good.
I'm trying to find it right now, but I kept searching. You have to search the whole thing. Oh, I found it. There you go. Because otherwise, it was just information about tarot was coming up. I'm like, no.
Well, I bet a lot of writers out there have run into this problem too, where they try to follow the hero's journey exactly, and it just ends up being frustrating. And to me, the more structured, if too much structure comes in, you are destroying your creativity. I think you need to rehearse and familiarize and understand these archetypes, the archetypes of the hero's journey, and now, at least in my opinion, the archetypes of the heroine's labyrinth. Internalize them, and then push them to the background, and then start to write your story. And then, in some cases, you'll accidentally recreate one of these archetypes. And as you're rereading, once you recognize it as an archetype, build it out. Go in there and build that out because it's natural to your story. It's organic. You did it on accident even. Build it out for its full power as far as within the reasonable limits of your story. But that happened to me several times where I had these archetypes accidentally, and I was able to go back in and enhance them. And in every case, it paid off.
I love that. And that goes to something that I believe, which is that I feel that, well, it may depend on the kind of story you're telling, but especially someone like myself, I'm very interested in myth and telling stories that have a mythic feel to them. It seems to me that because I am quite convinced by this idea that these archetypes are, they're somehow connected to something deeper in our minds, to dreams, that kind of a thing, that I feel that for me as a storyteller, it's equally important that I be, I'm up here analyzing, understanding, all these different tools to use. It's as important that I'm here, that I'm connected with my own intuition and my own subconscious. Almost you could think about the masculine or feminine aspects of creativity kind of a thing, sort of, kind of. But it's just the point that that I have to be in tune with that, and I have to be able to listen to my soul and know what speaks to my soul, because that is going to end up resonating with people, I think.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And like that yin and the yang, I think, and I don't even think anyone would disagree with me on this, I think all of us are a little bit masculine and feminine to varying degrees anyway. Even very masculine people can have feminine aspects of their personality spectrum. You have to, I think you're right, you have to be in tune with where you're at in the story as it pertains to your characters, and then have the courage to draw from it, whatever that is, and then just run with that,
Yeah.
So
I want to give another aside. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, nothing. Go ahead.
Okay. Just a quick random aside about that. One of my heroes is Neil Gaiman. And his stuff is so, his stuff is so
the whole Sandman collection right up there.
I'm reading it right now. I'm reading, it's just you read any of his works and you feel like you're reading an old myth, and it's so great. Yes. But something interesting is that there's a quote from him where he started to read the Hero with 1,000 Faces and got about halfway through and stopped reading it, because he said, if this is true, I don't want to know. If I write anything like this, I want it to happen organically. I want it to happen because it's natural. And he's a giant, of course. He's one of the masters. So maybe not all of us can get away with that. But I thought that was really interesting that this guy out there at least is listening very much to his intuition when he writes his story. So that's good to know.
I noticed you showed the book Hero with 1,000 Faces. I'll just tell, I finished it.
Yeah.
But man, it was brutal. That was one of the hardest books I've read. It was not.
It is hard to read sometimes.
It is not what I expected. He uses such esoteric examples that I'm like, I guess this is true about, this tribal story, from this culture. Unlike Star Wars, which is a great reference.
We can always go to Star Wars.
Yeah, because everyone's seen it. It's a perfect reference.
Yeah,
the hero's journey
but Star Wars
references,
referenced used.
Yeah,
good.
But in the heroes in the book that Campbell wrote, all of his references are unknown to all of us, except maybe a few. There's a few that are recognizable, but it was a very difficult read. The Christopher Vogler book basically is the intermediary. He's like, okay, here's what a scholar and academic and professor said. Here's my repackaging it to you, the regular person. That's what I think Christopher Vogler solved for the rest of us. Is he put it into terms we could understand, because I can't lie. I struggled with Joseph Campbell's work. It was brilliant.
That's funny.
But it was hard. It was hard. It was hard to read.
It's probably less hard for me just because I love myth. So a lot of it, maybe less of it was unfamiliar to me. Lots of it was unfamiliar. And I think he's also just kind of doing something different than, say, I mean, he's doing something similar to what you're doing, but also something different, because you're writing to writers like Christopher Vogler. Whereas, Joseph Campbell he was trying to make the broadest, he was trying to basically make an argument and prove it by, he could make his argument better the more examples he had from the broader range of places. He wanted to show this was a human universal. So, it's a little bit different, because if I understand correctly, you're more focused on helping solve a problem for writers and being practical. So
Joseph
because
Campbell's
originally,
an academic.
Yeah,
when I first started writing the Heroine's Labyrinth, I tried to write it like an academic, and I was getting really irritated. And I realized I'm not trying to be an academic. I am trying to talk as a writer. So I had to really go back in there. There was a point I had 80,000 words, and I had to get rid of 40,000 because it was me trying to not be a writer. And the 40,000 words of me being a writer, talking to writers, was magic. It was good writing. That's what I meant it. So anyway, I focused the whole book on just that. So that's where I feel the most comfortable anyway. I like talking to other writers about this, because other writers know what I'm talking about when they run into this kind of roadblocks we run into, at the same time that you have this passion for storytelling. And it can be tough when that passion is defeated by structure and inexperience. So this was definitely a book. It's a book for writers.
Yeah. I'll admit I had initially some skepticism when I was reading your prologue, and you said at the end that that Joseph Campbell has a lot of kind of esoteric examples, and you wanted to use a lot more modern things. Because the first thing I thought was like, okay, well then maybe this isn't going to be as archetypal if you can't use these older examples. But then I was like, okay, but it's a different goal. Like, this is a different kind of a book. So,
I do use some older archetypes and examples, but stories that I feel a lot of people would still be able to resonate with, because I feel like if I brought up, let's say, some random or an old thing that no one's ever read before or knows, or most people won't recognize, that I've missed an opportunity to make a connection with what I'm describing. So I tried to stick with, Star Wars, Star Trek, Hunger Games, Aliens, Terminator, all these hero-centric stories that I felt that were good. Silence of the Lambs was a very good one. Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, the ones that I felt that most of us are familiar with. I just felt that those would be better references to meet that to get that connection that I was looking for.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
So did you have anything else, Brianna?
Let me see. There might not be much.
Check your notes. So you would say, Doug, then I'll ask that historically, then you think that there has been a misclassification of some stories as hero's journey, which are not.
I would hate to say that it's been misclassified. What I would say is, with only one model to draw from, we're going to fit everything through that model and say it works or it doesn't. And that caused problems for me, for example. But with this other model that I have now, when I'm watching a story, I have the second model to draw from or to classify what's going on. So what I think will happen, what I hope will happen, is that people will rewatch a movie and be like, actually, that reminds me a little bit more of the Heroine's Labyrinth. and they can look at the criteria, they can compare it, and just like we do naturally right now with the hero's journey, they'll see that some things will fit into the heroine's labyrinth better than the hero's journey. And the reason I'm happy about that is because I feel like because the hero's journey has been the only model to draw from, and it doesn't always work, people attack it. And I feel like they're attacking it in some cases errantly. It doesn't need to be attacked. We just didn't have anything else to compare it to. So I feel like the heroine's labyrinth, at least for me, gave me a second litmus test that a lot of stories will fall into. And like Moana, something that looked like a hero's journey, you'll see all the hero's journey tropes, and then you'll see these other tropes. And what's cool is when you recognize the other tropes, the story actually takes on a greater meaning. For like I said, when the conch shell started leading her like breadcrumbs into the ocean, and I was like, is the ocean her labyrinth? It just took on this whole different dimension to me. And her symbol is a spiral, and the spiral is usually a symbol for a labyrinth in a lot of the symbolism books that I've had. So it just takes on this whole other dimension, and it gives you a whole other level to appreciate the story. Or when she pulls out I think it's Pananu stone, that's a shield maiden moment. The villain at the moment is about to strike Maui. She's about to kill him, and she stops the goddess in her tracks with that, and then walks up serenely to the goddess, unafraid, complete. It's a very powerful scene, and it's even more powerful in the context of the shield maiden moment than it was with the hero's journey. If I just say this is a supreme ordeal or single combat, I'm like, oh, well, the combat stopped. Not for the shield maiden. Not for that, under that archetypal viewpoint, the moment takes on a greater meaning to me. So it's good to have this other model to draw from, because it allows me to appreciate a moment instead of criticizing the same moment because it failed to meet the criteria of the hero's journey, if that makes sense. Or feeling that it's weak under this other rubric,
that it has another thing to look at. Yeah,
right, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say.
Do you see who's in the chat?
I just noticed that. Hello.
Hey, Cameron. Cameron's in the chat. Cameron says Doug's heroine's journey or labyrinth thesis is magnificent. I've read the manuscript, so Cameron has read this.
One of the lucky few who know all the secrets. Just
kidding. when Cameron said some positive things to me, I played it cool because it was a Zoom call, but inside I was so happy because I had expected Cameron to destroy me, and I was very nervous. So when he had some positive things to say, inside I was like, oh my god, Cameron said it. So
and he don't always get, it's not always easy to get, Cameron's very honest and he's good at breaking things down.
Well,
so
and he had,
understanding
there was definitely some moments where he was challenging me and or telling me that I didn't go far enough or that I missed a major angle on this big theme. And there was a couple things that Cameron said that completely changed the dynamic that I was discussing, because he came in with this other thought and I was like, well, that changes things completely. So Cameron's awesome. Yes. I salute him. That's great that he's here.
So I consulted my notes and I did have a little bit more, but I don't think it's relevant anymore, and it's stuff that I kind of want to think about more. So basically we've gotten through it. I feel like you have convinced me, so bravo.
Awesome. Well,
because I was already mostly on it, but I was kind of skeptical, but I feel like I'm there now. So good job.
Skepticism is good, and that's why I was very appreciative that you wanted to ask me some of the tougher questions, because that means that you really care about it and that you're really thinking about it. So to me, I was like, well, and that's why I told you early on, I was like, if I don't know, I'm just going to say, because I don't want to try to BS an answer or ad hoc it. I'd rather think about it and try to come up with a good answer, or admit that maybe I misfired somewhere. I'm not above that either.
Let me ask. I was just scrolling through to see if any of the channel members had questions that we should bring up. Let me this, I don't want to spiral too out of control, but let me bring up what James said, because we may have already addressed this to a certain point, talking about mixing things. But James does ask, is the Minotaur necessarily a structural element, or is a villain archetype that can be used across a variety of stories?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's structural in the sense of how the villain is. What about the villain is archetypal? Is it a militant culture destroyer who comes from outside the native culture? Or is it a member of the native culture who has to, by design, structurally speaking, is this villain someone that must be socially acceptable to the masses while hiding a tyrannical side? So to me, the Minotaur is by nature structural. And if you think about the Minotaur itself, half man, half beast. The Minotaur in mythology is a cursed creature. The word Minotaur actually comes from a proper pronoun. It was the name. Minotauros means the bull of Minos. That was his name. And it's a cursed creature. So that's why I feel like, in my opinion, the Minotaur character is mostly irredeemable, or often hard to reform. But it is half beast, half man. It is outwardly benevolent and secretly tyrannical. I think that's a structural archetype. It could work for both. It could work in several areas. But I just wanted to draw a distinction between that type of villain and someone like Thanos, who's not mad. I mean, Thanos is a militant culture destroyer. The Emperor, Darth Vader, these people are coming in to conquer you and destroy you. And if you think about it in a mythical term, the dragon archetype, the dragon breathes fire. So it annihilates cities and safe havens with its stream of fire. The Death Star has the green laser that does the same thing. Godzilla breathes radiation. These villains have a very specific attribute to them that wipe out cultures. Sauron, the armies of Mordor, they're not there to pass themselves off as like mostly friendly or partially friendly. They're there to destroy Gondor, to wipe it off. So structurally, that is a different villain than the Masked Minotaur. And I think, at least from a writing standpoint, it's worth noting the differences so that you know as a writer which one best fits your story. And then max out on the archetypal power of one or the other. That's my thought anyway.
All right. Excellent question, James. Thank you. All right. Well, this has been wonderful. Yeah, this has been a wonderful discussion. I hope everyone has enjoyed it as much as I have. I'm so glad that both of you were able to get together, because this has been a fantastic magic.
Yeah, I was looking forward to meeting you, Brianna, and talking with you.
Me too. I was like, you're like a friend of a friend. I was looking forward to making it direct. So
well, I've listened to you and Heath in other videos, and they're not surfacey conversations. They're very deep and very insightful. And that's why I was very excited to get a chance to talk with you guys, because where else do you get to talk about this, like out in public?
I know, right?
Well, that's why I started this. That's why I was like, well, I want to have good conversations about these kinds of things.
Like if you're at a bar, you don't be like, hey, which villain archetype do you think?
Right.
Right. You have to find other writers usually that will have those kind of conversations.
Thank you. Cameron says it's a very deep channel. It is. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. So
talking about good and evil with Cameron was awesome.
Yes. Oh yeah. If you have not seen that one, the discussion about good and evil with Cameron was amazing. And the discussion with he was on with Brianna as well. And we discussed the fall, and that was great. So, okay. So what we'll do is we will get back together. Let's coordinate our next time, and we'll do Sleeping Beauty and Maleficent. And I texted Lou. I texted Lou and said we want to have him on about Moana, so we could go into deeper into that one as well.
Oh,
I'll have to rewatch that one. I'm gonna have to get my notes, because I had notes about Sleeping Beauty and the Beast, and I think we've covered a lot of that because of what you've been talking about, Doug. But I also had a bunch of notes from a long time ago. I've got to dig up on Sleeping Beauty, and I think Sleeping Beauty versus Maleficent, and how that changes the story and what they say differently is really important.
Maleficent
I've got a lot of
has to do with what I was talking about with the divine feminine and the dark feminine. So
and Maleficent tells some of this out of order. The Heroine's Labyrinth archetypes are out of order. So that's a great example for that.
All right. Well, all right. Well, Thank you, everybody. Now, hey, we should send everybody off. Doug, tell everybody where they can find you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up your existing book right now while you talk about that and talk about how they can find you and connect with you.
Well, right now, by my website, douglasaburton.com. It mostly focuses on Faraway Burton. There's a very old version of the Heroine's Labyrinth on there that you can kind of navigate, kind of a nutshell version of it, and then some older blogs there. But right now, I'm really excited to. So I have here or Faraway Bird, which is if you're into historical fiction, the book did win awards.
Nice.
I couldn't believe it, but it got recognized. So. The only reason I'm bringing that up is because you should get a good read out of it. It is a hell of a story. It conforms to the historical account, and yet it's very humanizing, and it reconciles certain things about her as a historical figure that no one's tried to reconcile like this before. And then soon, but the website will be updated with a lot more of the Heroine's Labyrinth because I'm loving this topic. So anyway, that's where you could find me.
So there is information on the Heroine's Labyrinth on the website.
Oh, wait till the book. Awesome. Man, the book, it gets so much deeper and covers so many angles, and it never gets boring. Like it's very robust, and it is based on discussions I've had like this. There's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack with archetypes, as anyone who reads on these things know. Archetypes can be absolutely fascinating. It's like dream interpretation.
Oh, yes. I love that stuff.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And Brianna,
I'm looking forward to reading it.
Awesome.
Here's Brianna. Cameron says that book will be not talking about the Heroine's Labyrinth, a breakthrough in storytelling. The book is a breakthrough in storytelling.
And that is a heck of a thing for Cameron to say.
It is.
Right?
Extremely high praise. So, Brianna, is your shirt based on your cover? Are these the same things?
No, I just like the color red. I just like red and orange and anger. And so, this of course is a revolution story. So you have that kind of a heroine. So now, if you want to find me, I was just thinking every time I always jokingly say I'm nowhere because I don't update my social media, but I do have a website that is probably the best place to go if you want to I don't know, learn more. I have some more story discussion stuff there a little bit. It's briannadasilva.blog. briannadasilva.blog. I'll probably need to change it at some point to briannadasilva.com, but I have complicated issues with that domain name. And
Brianna and Heath, you guys need to write the Corruption Arc book. That has to come out.
I feel like it's kind of technically in progress now. There is an 11-page document that exists.
Oh, okay. So
currently there's something starting, but yes, I haven't updated this blog also in more than a year, but
that's how it goes, man. It ebbs and it flows.
Yeah.
And since Cameron's in the chat, I just want to say thank you to Cameron for even introducing me to Heath and also to Brianna by proximity, I guess.
Yes,
right.
Thank you, Cameron.
Yep, Cameron introduced me to Doug, so that he's also the reason why we are sitting here having this discussion today.
Yeah, so I just want to take a second and really say thank you because these have been great. I've really enjoyed this.
All right. Yeah, well, then we'll coordinate on when to get back together on Sleeping Beauty. We'll do it. We'll do it as soon as we can. And
awesome.
Actually, some crazy stuff is happening is that I originally was trying to do table talks Tuesday and Thursday nights, and originally I ran out of people to talk to. But I was trying to do it last summer, so it just wouldn't happen. And so then I was able to get it kind of going again, and now I actually have more people to talk to than I have Tuesdays and Thursdays.
That's
so we've even had to spill out to Sunday, like we did with John Wick, and then yesterday I spoke to Katie. So actually, the evening streams are becoming more frequent. So we might be able to do it earlier than just on whatever Tuesday or Thursday happens to come in. So we'll get together that, and I'll let everybody know. I guess I should drop one link into the chat. So if you want to know when more without having to rely on YouTube, the Raven Keep Discord server, please do like and subscribe. But also I've got a different channel in the Raven Keep Discord server for all the different shows that I do. And so you can figure out exactly what's coming up right there. Thank you, Mike.
You should bring up Daniel's Look at Daniel's quote. I just want to draw attention to that.
Oh, yes, that's good. I like anger, Brianna.
That's a T-shirt right there.
Yeah, well, yeah,
orange,
we do
black
need
and yellow T-shirt.
Yes, I like anger. All right, everybody, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I will see everybody in the morning for the morning grind at 9:30 a.m. Central. We may be looking at more of the Clash for Eternia He-Man board game tomorrow. But we're talking about all kinds of things in the Geekverse. So, all right, I'll see everybody at 9:30 a.m. for the morning grind. Bye, everybody. Later.